They didn't knock. They didn't break in with a scream. They waited until night fell, then came closer and closer and closer. These aren't urban legends. These are real stories of homes invaded, lives shattered, and killers who watched before they struck. If stories like this keep you up at night, consider subscribing. We tell the ones you won't find on the front page, but you'll never forget. Case 1. Setagaya Family Murder. In the quiet suburb of Setagaya, Tokyo, nestled among neatly trimmed hedges and rows of modest two-story homes, stood the Miyazawa family house. It was a peaceful neighborhood. Children played in the streets. Neighbors knew each other by name. And nothing truly terrible ever happened until the night of December 30th, 2000. That night, something unthinkable breached the calm. The Miyazawa family consisted of 4 people: Mikio the father, a 44-year-old advertising executive; Yasuko the mother, 41, a part-time teacher; their daughter Niina, just 8 years old; and their son Rei, who was only 6. They lived in a semi-detached house, with Yasuko's mother living next door. The 2 households were connected by a shared interior door. On the morning of December 31st, Yasuko's mother tried to contact the family. No answer. She walked next door and opened the connecting door. What she found would haunt her forever. All 4 members of the Miyazawa family were dead. Mikio's body was found at the foot of the staircase. He had been stabbed multiple times and showed signs of a struggle. Upstairs, Yasuko and Nina were found in their beds, both stabbed repeatedly. Even more disturbingly, little Rei had been strangled to death in his bedroom. But that was only the beginning of the horror. Police were summoned immediately. What they discovered wasn't just a crime scene, it was a puzzle drenched in blood laced with behavior that didn't make sense. The killer hadn't just murdered the family and fled. He had stayed for hours. Evidence suggested that after the murders, the killer remained inside the house well into the morning. He had eaten food from the refrigerator, ice cream specifically. He had used the family's computer. He had left blood-stained tissues all over the place. He had even used the family's toilet without flushing. Most shockingly, he had taken a nap on the living room sofa. The scene looked more like a squatter's camp than the aftermath of a slaughter. Whoever had done this seemed oddly comfortable, almost brazen. He had also treated his wounds using the family's first aid kit. Bloodstains on the sofa sink and walls allowed investigators to construct a rough timeline. The killer had lingered for several hours, but despite all of that, he was gone by the time police arrived. Police found a trove of physical evidence left behind: an unusual windbreaker, a scarf, a hip bag, and gloves. The items weren't Japanese brands. They were traced to South Korea, possibly brought over by a foreign national or a Japanese citizen with overseas ties. Even more damning, the killer had bled at the scene. His DNA was everywhere, and yet no one knew who he was. The Miyazawa murders became one of Japan's most confounding unsolved cases. Dozens of detectives were assigned. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police conducted over 12,000 interviews. More than 20,000 suspects were screened and eliminated. And still no arrest. A profile began to emerge. Based on the DNA, the suspect was likely male, possibly of mixed East Asian descent. His blood type was A. Analysis of sand found in his hip bag pointed to California's Edwards Air Force Base, suggesting he may have spent time in the United States. Police even tracked down the manufacturer of the windbreaker he left behind and narrowed the number of units sold in Japan to just 130. Every single purchaser was tracked, none matched the DNA. The oddities continued. One of the most chilling elements of the case was how close the killer had been both physically and psychologically. The Miyazawas had been aware of strange sounds and disturbances in the days leading up to the murder. Mikio had complained to friends about teenagers hanging around the nearby skate park, which backed up to their property. There were reports of Mikio confronting them, possibly making enemies. Others mentioned a strange man being seen in the area, but nothing was confirmed. It was theorized that the killer may have entered through the second-floor bathroom window, which had no security lock. A footprint was found on the wall, and that room faced the park. He might have climbed a tree or used the fence to gain access. Once inside, the sequence of attacks likely began with Mikio, who was downstairs. His hands showed signs of defensive wounds. He fought back hard, but he was overwhelmed and stabbed repeatedly. Then the killer moved upstairs. Ray, the youngest, had been strangled, perhaps to prevent noise. Yasuko and Nina were stabbed in their beds. Medical examiners estimated that each was attacked within minutes of one another. The psychological profile grew darker. The killer had not acted in a frenzy. He moved with eerie calm. After the murders, he logged onto the family's computer at 1:18 a.m. He accessed the internet and may have attempted to use the printer. It was as if he wasn't concerned about being caught. He ate melon, drank barley tea, and used a sanitary pad to wipe his bleeding hand. Then he settled in on the sofa. There were no signs of forced entry or ransacking. Nothing was stolen. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a sexual crime. It wasn't a random thrill killing by a transient. It felt intimate. Yet none of the Miyazawa's acquaintances could be linked to the evidence left behind. As the years dragged on, the case grew colder, but it never died. Each year on December 30th, Japanese media revisit the story. The house remains sealed as a crime scene. It stands like a silent witness, windows, shuttered memories frozen in time. Forensic advancements brought new hope. Mitochondrial DNA analysis revealed possible links to regions in Korea and parts of China. The killer's fingerprint, though partial, was preserved, but no match ever surfaced, not in Japan, not abroad. If the killer was ever arrested for another crime, his DNA had not been entered into any shared database. The deeper the investigation went, the more disturbing the timeline became. The killer had likely entered the house sometime before midnight, either through an unlocked window or the second-floor bathroom, which had a broken lock. What baffled investigators was how the family, particularly the parents, had not heard the intruder or reacted. Both parents had been attacked in their sleep, but the children were killed in a manner that suggested they may have woken up during the assault. Another theory considered was that the killer may have initially entered the house before the family returned from a local skating rink earlier that evening. This would mean the murderer had been hiding inside, waiting possibly in the attic or an unused room. That theory gained traction when police found signs of footprints and dust disturbance in the attic space, as well as an open vent that may have been used as a lookout point. Despite having the killer's DNA and a host of physical evidence, no match was ever found in Japan's national database. When international databases were consulted, there were still no conclusive hits. The profile suggested someone with mixed heritage, possibly part East Asian, part European, or Middle Eastern, adding to the mystery. Public speculation exploded. Was the killer a drifter, a foreigner with no ties to Japan, or worse, someone the family may have known? The neighborhood was middle-class, safe and quiet. This kind of violence was unimaginable. The fact that nothing appeared stolen and the killer had lingered in the home afterward ruled out robbery as a motive. It seemed more personal or psychotic. In the years that followed, the Miyazawa home remained untouched, a sealed crime scene frozen in time. Local police kept the interior exactly as they found it, hoping one day that a new lead or a technological breakthrough in forensics might reignite the case. Investigators from around the world studied the file. It became a haunting classroom example in criminology lectures and law enforcement seminars, baffling everyone who reviewed it. On each anniversary of the murders, tributes and flowers appear in front of the home. Online forums and amateur sleuth communities continue to dissect the case, clinging to every known detail. Some believe the killer may have died. Others think he lives a quiet life, maybe even in Japan, blending in, waiting to see if anyone ever connects the dots. The Setagaya Family Murder remains Japan's most infamous unsolved case, a night where safety shattered in one of the world's safest countries. 4 lives were taken, A city was stunned, and a ghost still lingers in a home that refuses to be forgotten. Case 2. Villisca Axe Murders. It was a quiet town. Just a few thousand people tucked into the gentle farmlands of southwestern Iowa. Villisca wasn't known for much, its churches, its train stop, and the kind of peace you didn't think could be broken. But on the morning of June 10, 1912, that peace was shattered so brutally that it still hasn't recovered. The Moore family had gone to church the night before. It was a Sunday. Josiah Moore, a respected businessman, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine Boyd, and Paul, were attending a Children's Day service at the local Presbyterian church. 2 other children, Lena and Ina Stillinger, had joined them for the evening and were invited to sleep over at the Moore house. They all walked home together under a moonless sky, unaware they were walking toward the end. Sometime that night, as the town slept, someone entered the Moore residence. The killer wasn't in a hurry. They had time. They moved through the house with a patience that suggested either control or madness. Josiah was killed, first struck in the head with the blunt end of an axe. His wife Sarah was next. Both of them were bludgeoned so severely that their faces were unrecognizable. The killer then turned to the children, methodically moving through the house and delivering the same fate to each of them. The Stillinger girls' guests, sleeping in the downstairs bedroom, were the last to die. But what happened after the murders is what made this crime especially horrifying. The killer stayed in the house. After slaughtering 8 people, they lingered. Evidence suggests they went back to the parents' bedroom and continued to inflict wounds on Josiah's face with the blade of the axe long after he was already dead. Then they moved through the house, covering mirrors with cloth, draping clothes over the victims' faces, and even placing a slab of bacon wrapped in fabric next to a piece of key evidence, the murder weapon. On the kitchen table, investigators found a plate of uneaten food and a bowl of bloody water, as if the killer had tried to wash up. No neighbors had heard screams. No one had seen anything unusual. But the morning after, when a neighbor noticed no activity at the house and called Josiah's brother, the horror was finally uncovered. Authorities were stunned by the savagery and the sheer number of victims. 8 people, 6 of them children, all murdered in their sleep. The town went into full panic mode. Doors that had never been locked were suddenly bolted shut. Children were pulled from schools. Neighbors stopped speaking. And the fear that the killer might still be among them spread like a fever. There was no shortage of suspects. In fact, there were too many. Frank F. Jones, a prominent Villisca businessman and political rival of Josiah Moore, was considered a strong suspect. Some believed he had hired a hitman, a known criminal named William Blackie Mansfield, to carry out the killings. Mansfield had a history of similar crimes, including the axe murder of his own family, but nothing ever stuck. No charges were filed. Then came Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher who had been at the Children's Day service the night of the murders. He was an odd man, reportedly disturbed with a history of mental instability and sexual deviance. At one point, he even confessed to the murders, claiming he was compelled by a divine voice. But his confession was incoherent, contradictory, and possibly coerced. He later recanted, and after 2 trials, he was acquitted. The lack of solid evidence plagued the investigation. This was 1912, decades before modern forensic science. There were no security cameras, no DNA testing, no psychological profiling. The murder weapon was left behind, but it gave up no clues. Footprints smudged, fingerprints unusable. The killer had left behind a perfectly chaotic scene, bloody, brutal, but maddeningly clean of answers. And so the case went cold, but the house did not. Over the decades, the Moore residence became a source of dark fascination. Locals claimed to hear footsteps in empty rooms, whispers from nowhere, and the laughter of children when no one was around. Paranormal investigators began visiting the home in the 1990s. Many reported batteries draining inexplicably, doors slamming without cause, and sudden drops in temperature. One man even stabbed himself in the chest while staying overnight in the house he survived, but never explained why he did it. To this day, the Villisca Axe Murder House remains open to visitors. You can book a tour. You can even spend the night. But many don't make it till morning. They report strange dreams. Some say they feel watched. Others swear they hear an axe being dragged across the floorboards. More than 100 years have passed, and still no one knows who did it. No one knows why. 8 lives were taken in the dead of night in a home that had never known violence. The town of Villisca has changed. People have moved on. But that house, quiet, plain, unassuming, still holds the weight of something unfinished. The axe was real. The blood was real. And so is the silence that followed. Because when someone commits a crime like that, and then simply vanishes, the fear never really leaves. Case 3. Hinterkaifeck Murders. In the frozen Bavarian countryside of Germany, between the forests and farmlands, stood a small, isolated homestead known as Hinterkaifeck. It wasn't even a real town, just a farmstead nestled about 70 kilometers north of Munich, outside the village of Grobern. In March of 1922, this peaceful place would become the scene of one of the most perplexing, gruesome, and unsolved mass murders in European history. The Gruber family lived there. Andreas, the patriarch, was 63. His wife, Cecilia, was 72. Their daughter, Victoria, a widow, was 35, and she lived with her 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Also living with them was their new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had just arrived the day of the murders. On the surface, Hinterkaifeck looked like any other rural farm. But the events leading up to March 31st, 1922, suggest something was wrong, deeply, chillingly wrong. 6 months prior, the family's previous maid had quit abruptly. She claimed the house was haunted. Strange noises in the attic, unseen footsteps, whispers in the dark. The Grubers dismissed it, but they couldn't ignore the signs forever. In the days before the murders, Andreas told neighbors he'd found unfamiliar footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the house, but none leading away. He also mentioned that keys had gone missing. The family heard noises again from the attic. The local police were never informed. Andreas was a stern man, not the type to ask for help. Then came March 31st. No one outside the farm would hear from the family again. Over the next few days, suspicions grew. Little Cecilia didn't show up to school. Victoria missed choir practice. Their mail began to pile up. But it wasn't until April 4th, 4 days later, that neighbors finally investigated. What they found inside the barn stunned them. Under a pile of hay, the bodies of Andreas, Cecilia Sr., Victoria, and young Cecilia were discovered. Each had been killed with a mattock, a type of pickaxe. Their skulls were crushed. Blood soaked the hay beneath them. The blows were violent, deliberate. The child's face was torn with horror. Her jaw shattered, tufts of her own hair clenched in her hands. She had survived the initial attack and slowly died in agony beside her family. Inside the house, it was just as grim. Maria, the maid, was found murdered in her bed. Little Joseph was found in his crib covered with his mother's dress, his tiny body torn apart by the same weapon. But what chilled investigators even more was what the killer did next. They stayed. For days, neighbors reported smoke from the chimney. Someone had fed the animals, milked the cows, prepared food. The house had been lived in. Beds were used. Meals were eaten. Whoever had committed the murders hadn't fled. They had moved in, and then vanished. Police found little to go on. No clear motive. No signs of forced entry. No robbery. The murder weapon, a homemade mattock, was found hidden in the barn. The killer had taken the time to clean it and stash it. Footprints led from the forest to the house. But again, none led away. Theories swirled. One theory focused on Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor and former lover of Victoria. He had a complicated history with the family and had once claimed paternity of Joseph, only to deny it later in a legal dispute. He was among the first to enter the home after the murders. Some claimed he was too calm, too composed. Others noticed he'd unlocked the front door odd, since it was thought to be locked from the inside. But there was never enough evidence. He was questioned multiple times, but never charged. Then there were rumors of incest. Whispers spread that Andreas and Victoria had an unnatural relationship, confirmed by court records that showed both had been convicted of incest years prior. Could the killings have been revenge or the silencing of a dark secret? Another theory involved vagrants or soldiers from the aftermath of World War I. Germany was unstable. Lawless pockets remained in the countryside, but again there was no sign of forced entry and no valuables were taken. And still the most unsettling theory of all was the idea that the killer had lived in the attic for days, maybe weeks before the murders. The noises, the footsteps, the missing keys, the attic door slightly ajar. Had someone been watching them from above, waiting for the right moment? In the years that followed, the farm was demolished, but not before police conducted a final disturbing act. They decapitated all 6 victims. The skulls were sent to Munich for analysis in hopes of finding clues. But World War II broke out. The skulls were lost in the chaos. To this day, the victims are buried in a local cemetery, headless. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved. No one was ever arrested. No confession ever surfaced. And despite modern advancements in forensic science, nothing new has ever been proven. All that's left are questions. Who was the man in the attic? Why stay and live among the dead? And what kind of mind could walk silently into a house full of life and leave it in silence? Over a century later, the Hinterkaifeck farm is gone. But the story lingers, passed down through generations, retold in whispers. Locals still talk about the chilling winds that blow through the trees at the edge of where the farm once stood. Some claim they hear footsteps on the old path. Others say the silence there is too complete, too unnatural. Maybe the killer was never caught because he never left. Maybe he's still there waiting, watching, silent. 3 families, 3 homes. One terrifying pattern: someone was always watching. Sometimes the real horror isn't in what you see, but in what saw you first. If these stories unsettled you, you might want to stay with us. Subscribe for more true cases that echo long after the lights go out.